He was the only man in a forgotten town, and every woman needed him to stay. Dustwood was a town that time had forgotten. Its streets were empty, dusty, and cracked from years of neglect. The wooden sidewalks creaked under the wind, and the paint on most buildings had peeled away long ago, leaving bare wood that glowed in the afternoon sun. A few houses leaned slightly as if they were tired from holding themselves up. Even the general store, which had once been the heart of the town, now looked like it might collapse if a strong gust of wind passed through. Most of the windows were shuttered, and only a thin trail of smoke from the inn's chimney suggested that life still lingered here. Into this quiet, lonely town rode a man on a worn-out horse. His boots were dusty, his hat tilted down to shade his eyes, and his coat had patches from long travels. His name was Elias Turner. He moved slowly, calmly, as if he had learned a long time ago that rushing through life often brought more trouble than it was worth. His eyes, sharp and observing, scanned every corner of Dustwood. He had seen many towns, some thriving and some crumbling, and he knew there was a difference between a place that would welcome him and a place that would demand more than he could give. Dustwood, he thought, fell somewhere in the middle. The town looked almost lifeless, but he noticed small signs of care. A few flower pots leaned against the walls of some houses. A rope hung neatly on a post and a bench was swept clean. That told him that people still lived here, that they were still trying. That intrigued him. For the first time in a long while, he felt a flicker of curiosity and perhaps even hope. As he rode down the main street, a few women appeared from the shadows. They were cautious at first, watching him from doorways and windows. Their eyes followed his every move. Elias dismounted slowly, patting his horse's neck before letting it wander a little to nibble at some sparse grass near the edge of the street. He walked toward the center of town, his boots crunching on the dry dirt. One woman, older and with silver streaks in her hair, stepped forward. She introduced herself as Mrs. Gable, a widow who ran the inn that still served meals to the few travelers who passed through. Her voice was firm, but her eyes betrayed a mix of curiosity and concern. "You're not from around here," she said. Elias shook his head. "No, ma'am, just passing through," he replied, his voice calm, steady, and carrying the kind of tone that made people want to trust him. Mrs. Gable's eyes narrowed slightly. She was the kind of woman who had learned to read people quickly. Passing through or staying? Towns like this don't often see visitors, and most leave after a night or two. Elias looked around at the quiet streets, the leaning buildings, the small signs of life. "I might stay," he said carefully. "Depends on what I find here." That was enough to capture her attention. She studied him for a long moment, as if deciding whether to trust her instincts. Finally, she nodded. "You might want to speak with the others. Some of us manage farms, some run the store, some just keep this place together as best we can. But I'll warn you, Dustwood is not easy. It takes more than a strong arm to live here. It takes heart." Elias nodded, understanding her meaning without needing her to elaborate. He had heart, but he had learned long ago that heart alone wasn't always enough. He also needed to see if he could fit into the rhythm of this town, if the town needed him as much as he might need it. As he continued walking, he noticed the women watching him from porches and windows. Unlike the men he had met in other towns who might have challenged or ignored him, these women seemed to measure him. Their eyes didn't just look. They assessed, calculated. There was a quiet tension in the air, a sense that this man's presence could shift the balance of their fragile world. Elias paused near the general store, where Lila, the innkeeper's daughter, was arranging some goods on a shelf outside. She looked young but strong, with hands hardened from work that most men avoided. She straightened when she saw him, her expression a mixture of hope and caution. "You're the first man we've seen in months," she said without preamble. "Are you looking for work, or are you just passing through?" Elias smiled faintly, a small curve that didn't reach his eyes. "I'm looking for a place where I might be useful," he said. "Somewhere I can lend a hand and maybe stay for a while." Lila's expression softened slightly. She knew the town needed someone like him, a man who could help with the work and protect them when trouble came. But she also knew that trusting a stranger could be risky. "Well," she said, "if you're serious about helping, we could use a strong pair of hands. But life here isn't easy. It's dusty, quiet, and sometimes dangerous." "I've handled danger before," Elias replied simply, though he left out the many scars and regrets he carried from his past. He had learned not to burden strangers with stories they might not understand. The women in the town began to gather slowly, curious about this newcomer. They whispered to one another, casting quick glances his way. There was Martha, the schoolteacher, who had stayed behind because she cared for the children and the elderly, refusing to leave even as most people fled to bigger towns. Her eyes, sharp and intelligent, studied Elias carefully. She wondered if he could truly be trusted, but something about his calm confidence reassured her. For the first time in years, the women of Dustwood felt a spark of hope. They had grown accustomed to relying solely on each other, to managing life without a man's help. But there was no denying the truth. They needed a protector, a worker, someone strong enough to handle the tasks that kept them alive. Elias, with his quiet confidence and experienced hands, seemed like he might be that man. Elias walked slowly through the streets, noticing every detail: the broken fence around the cornfield, the half-collapsed barn, the empty stables. He could see the work that needed doing, the challenges that lay ahead. And as he looked at the women, he realized something he hadn't expected. These people were resilient. They weren't helpless, even if the town itself was crumbling. They had survived years of neglect, of hardship, and of loneliness. They had survived because they never gave up. He felt a strange pull in his chest, something he hadn't felt in a long time. Maybe this town, forgotten and overlooked by the world, could become more than a stop on his journey. Maybe it could become a place where he belonged. By evening, Elias had been introduced to most of the remaining townspeople. They invited him to the inn for dinner, a modest meal of bread, stew, and coffee, but offered with warmth and gratitude. As he ate, he listened to their stories. Tales of lost husbands, of children who had gone to other towns, of outlaws who sometimes passed through looking for trouble. The stories were both sad and inspiring, filled with struggle but also with a determination to survive. Elias realized that this town was fragile, yes, but it was also strong. It was made up of people who refused to give in, even when the odds were against them. And for the first time in a long while, he felt that maybe he could help them. Maybe he could become part of their story. As the sun set over Dustwood, casting long shadows across the empty streets, Elias stepped outside. He looked down the main street, feeling the weight of the town's history and its uncertain future. The wind carried the scent of dust and old wood, mingling with the faint smell of cooking fires from the inn. He took a deep breath and knew that he was no longer just a traveler passing through. Something about this place had captured his attention, and something about him had captured theirs. That night, as Elias lay in a small rented room at the inn, he thought about what the days ahead might bring. There would be work, surely. Challenges, certainly. But perhaps for the first time in his life, he would have a reason to stay, a purpose. And in a town that had been forgotten by the world, maybe he could find a place where he mattered. Dustwood might have been a quiet, lonely town, but with Elias Turner arriving, the air seemed to carry a new possibility. Something was about to change, and everyone could feel it. Elias Turner woke the next morning to the soft light of the sun spilling through the thin curtains of his small room at the inn. The quiet of Dustwood was almost complete, broken only by the faint crowing of a rooster somewhere down the street and the soft clatter of a broom on wooden floors. He dressed quickly, pulling on his worn coat and boots, and stepped outside. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of earth and dry grass. Dustwood was waking slowly, its people moving carefully through their routines, as if each day was a small victory. He noticed the women already beginning their work. Lila, the innkeeper's daughter, was carrying buckets of water from the well, her arms steady and strong despite the early hour. Martha, the schoolteacher, was sweeping the area around the small schoolhouse, clearing away the dust and debris that had gathered over months. Elias watched quietly for a moment, studying the way they moved, the way they carried out tasks that would overwhelm most men. There was determination in their steps, but also a quiet worry. He could see that this town, while full of strength, had vulnerabilities, weak spots that only a strong man could help with. Elias approached Lila first. "Good morning," he said, his voice calm but carrying a firmness that seemed to ground the town itself. She looked up, surprised to see him outside so early. "You're up early," she said, brushing her hands on her apron. "I didn't expect you to be helping so soon. I want to see what's needed," Elias replied. "This town has been through a lot. I need to understand it before I can do anything." Lila nodded, a small smile appearing on her face. She respected his honesty. "Well," she said, "there's always something that needs doing. The fences are broken, the barn roof is weak, and the livestock could use someone who knows what they're doing." Elias's eyes brightened slightly. He had spent years on ranches and farms, and he knew the work required to keep a place running. "Show me what needs the most attention," he said. Together they walked toward the outskirts of town, past the cracked sidewalks and empty streets. The barn stood at the edge of the town, leaning slightly to one side. Its wood was aged and brittle, and Elias could see the danger it posed if a storm came through. The fences surrounding the small field were broken in places, leaving gaps where the livestock could wander into danger. Elias knelt, running his hands along the wood, testing its strength and noting the weak spots. "This will take some work," he said, "but it can be fixed." Lila looked at him, relief in her eyes. "We've tried to repair it ourselves, but none of us have the strength to do it properly. You might be the only one who can." Elias nodded, already forming a plan in his mind. He would work with them, teach them what they could handle, and take care of the tasks that required more strength or experience. For the first time in a long while, he felt a sense of purpose. He was no longer wandering aimlessly. He was needed, and he wanted to rise to that challenge. As they worked, other women began to join. Martha brought tools from the schoolhouse, and a few others came from their homes, curious about the new man and what he could do. Elias directed them patiently, showing them how to lift heavy beams, how to reinforce the barn, and how to mend the fences. He didn't just do the work himself, he taught them, explaining why each step mattered. His calm voice and clear instructions gave them confidence, and slowly the women began to believe that the town could survive if they all worked together. During a short break, Elias sat on a wooden fence post, wiping the sweat from his brow. The women gathered around, offering him a piece of bread or a sip of water. He accepted graciously, observing them as they talked quietly among themselves. There was a mix of curiosity and admiration in their eyes. They had not seen a man like him in a long time, someone who could work hard, teach them, and still treat them with respect. "Why did you come here?" Martha asked suddenly, her voice thoughtful. "Most men would pass this town by without a second thought." Elias paused, considering how much to share. He had learned long ago that some truths were best kept private. "I don't usually stay long," he said finally, "but something about this place felt different. You all have kept this town alive when most would have left. That takes strength, and I respect that. Maybe I can help." Martha nodded slowly, understanding his words more deeply than he realized. She could see that he was not just passing through, not just looking for a place to rest. He had a purpose, and that purpose might align with theirs. As the day continued, Elias proved his skills in more ways than one. He fixed a section of the barn roof that had threatened to collapse. Using his knowledge of wood and construction, he repaired a broken fence so that the livestock would be safe from wandering off or being taken by predators. Even small tasks, like helping with the water supply and moving heavy sacks of grain, were accomplished with a skill and efficiency that impressed the women. By late afternoon, Dustwood looked a little less forgotten. The barn was sturdy, the fences were intact, and the town's small field had order once again. Elias stood back, surveying the work, and felt a quiet satisfaction. He had done more than fix wood and fences. He had begun to restore hope. But it wasn't all work. Elias also spent time listening to the stories of the women, learning about their lives, their struggles, and their dreams. Lila spoke of her late father and how she had tried to keep the inn running. Martha shared stories of the children she taught and how she had stayed to care for the town when everyone else left. Each story revealed a layer of strength and resilience that Elias admired. He realized that these women had survived because they refused to give up, even when the odds were against them. The day ended with a small moment of camaraderie. Elias helped light the lamps outside the inn, casting a warm glow over the street. The women gathered, smiling at the progress they had made together. Now, for the first time in a long while, the town seemed alive, not just with action but with possibility. Elias knew, however, that this was only the beginning. Dustwood had challenges ahead: harsh weather, scarcity of supplies, and the occasional threat of outsiders who might take advantage of their vulnerability. But he also knew that with teamwork, determination, and guidance, the town could survive. And more importantly, he realized that he could be the person to help them face those challenges. That night, as Elias prepared for bed, he reflected on the day. He had earned the trust of the women, not through words alone, but through action, patience, and respect. They had begun to rely on him not just for strength, but for guidance. And though he had always been a wanderer, moving from town to town with no roots, he felt a strange pull toward Dustwood, a sense that this could be the place where he belonged, at least for now. Outside, the town was quiet once more. The wind rustled through the dry grass, and the faint sound of water from the well echoed in the stillness. Dustwood was far from perfect, but it was alive in its own way, held together by the resilience of its people, and now by the quiet determination of a man who had decided to stay. Elias fell asleep that night with the sound of the town around him. For the first time in years, he felt a connection, not just to the place, but to the people who had welcomed him cautiously, but with hope. Dustwood had been forgotten by the world, but it would not be forgotten by him. He would help it thrive, and in return, perhaps he would find a sense of belonging he had never known before. As the stars shone over the small town, Dustwood seemed a little brighter, a little stronger, and in the quiet, Elias Turner began to feel that maybe, just maybe, he had found a home. The days in Dustwood began to take on a rhythm, one that was unlike anything Elias Turner had experienced in his wandering years. The town, once silent and fragile, was slowly stirring to life under his quiet guidance. Each morning the sun rose over the cracked streets and boarded up shops, casting long shadows that danced across the dust. Elias woke before dawn most days, as though the town itself whispered to him that there was work to be done, lives to protect, and hope to rebuild. The women of Dustwood had started to rely on him more than they realized, not only for his strength in handling the heavy labor, but for his knowledge and calm judgment. Martha, the schoolteacher, watched him as he repaired a fence with the precision of someone who had done this work countless times. "You make it look easy," she said, her voice carrying admiration. Elias looked up, wiping sweat from his brow. "It's all about knowing the right way to hold the tools and paying attention to what could go wrong," he replied. "You don't just work fast, you work smart. Otherwise it doesn't last." Martha nodded thoughtfully. She had learned the value of patience and careful work from years of teaching and managing the small schoolhouse. But seeing Elias in action reminded her that experience could turn effort into lasting results. Even Lila, who had grown up helping her father in the inn, found herself learning new ways to lift, carry, and repair that made her work more effective. Dustwood itself began to show signs of improvement. The barn, now sturdy and repaired, no longer threatened to collapse in the next storm. The fences around the livestock were strong, standing tall against the wind and keeping the animals safely contained. The general store, though still modest, was now organized and secure, its shelves restocked with supplies that Elias helped carry from the wagons arriving in town. Small victories like these began to lift the town's spirit, and even the older residents seemed lighter, their movements less burdened by the constant worry of survival. Yet it wasn't just the physical work that Elias contributed. He brought a sense of calm and order to a town that had lived in quiet anxiety for years. When disagreements arose, whether over work schedules or how to repair something, he mediated with fairness, listening carefully to both sides before offering a solution. His presence reminded the townspeople that someone could handle the challenges without fear or anger, and that example encouraged them to approach problems with the same steady mindset. One afternoon, as Elias was teaching Lila how to properly secure the barn doors for the approaching evening wind, Martha approached with a worried look. "Elias," she said, lowering her voice so others wouldn't overhear, "there's talk that a band of rustlers might be passing near Dustwood soon. They've hit other towns, taking livestock and causing trouble. We might be next." Elias's jaw tightened slightly. He had faced outlaws before, and he knew the danger they posed. "We'll be ready," he said calmly. "But first we need to make sure the town can defend itself. You all can handle more than you think, but we need strategy, and we need to be organized." Over the next few days, he taught the women simple ways to protect themselves in the town. He showed them how to reinforce doors and windows, how to move quietly and observe the surroundings, and even how to use basic tools for defense in an emergency. It was not about fear, it was about preparation. Elias wanted them to feel empowered, not scared. At the same time, the town continued its daily work. The women managed the inn, the store, and the small fields with Elias's guidance, learning to balance labor and vigilance. He helped them find better ways to store food, manage water, and organize chores so that nothing was left to chance. Slowly, Dustwood was no longer a town merely surviving. It was becoming a town learning to thrive. Through these days of work and preparation, bonds formed quietly. Lila admired Elias for his strength and patience, while Martha saw a deeper side of him, his thoughtful attention to the small details, the care he took with people and animals alike. Some of the younger women, who had grown up without fathers or brothers to rely on, began to see him as a protector, a man whose presence alone brought a sense of security. Elias, for his part, began to feel a connection he had not felt in years. Wandering from town to town, he had never stayed long enough to matter to anyone. He had been careful to keep himself distant, to avoid attachments that could weigh him down or leave him vulnerable. But Dustwood was different. These women were not asking for charity. They were asking for partnership. And, Elias found himself wanting to give more than just physical strength. He wanted to belong, to be part of a community that valued him as he valued them. The quiet confidence he had brought to Dustwood began to spread. The women who had once struggled to manage alone now worked together efficiently, learning from Elias and from each other. Tasks that had once taken hours could now be completed in less time, leaving moments for rest, conversation, and laughter. Dustwood, once a town of survival, was becoming a town of life. One evening, as the sun dipped low behind the hills, casting golden light across the town, Elias and Martha walked together near the schoolhouse. She was carrying a basket of freshly gathered vegetables, and he offered to help. They spoke quietly about the town, its challenges, and its potential. "You've done more than I expected," Martha said, her voice gentle but sincere. "You've brought hope back to a place that was nearly forgotten." Elias shook his head slightly. "I didn't do it alone. You all worked hard, too. I just helped where I could." Martha smiled, but there was a hint of something more in her eyes, a recognition that his presence mattered, not just for the work he did, but for the spirit he brought with him. Elias felt a warmth he hadn't realized he had missed, a connection that went beyond simple survival or labor. The next morning brought another challenge. A group of wild horses had wandered into the town's small field, causing panic among the livestock and threatening to destroy crops. Elias acted quickly, riding out to guide the horses away and securing the area to prevent further disruption. The women watched in admiration, their respect for him growing even more. His courage and skill were not flashy or boastful, but steady and reliable, a combination that gave them confidence in a way they had not felt for years. By the end of the week, Dustwood had begun to look almost alive. The barns were repaired, fences stood strong, livestock was safe, and the town had a sense of order it had not seen in decades. The women moved with purpose, their steps confident rather than weary, their faces showing hope rather than worry. And in the midst of it all stood Elias Turner, quiet and steady, a man who had become more than a stranger. He was now the town's anchor. Evenings were spent around small fires, sharing stories and planning for the days ahead. Elias listened as the women spoke of their dreams, of what Dustwood could become if they worked together. He offered advice and guidance, but also learned from them. Their resilience, resourcefulness, and care for one another impressed him more than he expected. He realized that being needed was not just about physical strength or skill, it was about trust, respect, and the willingness to invest oneself in something greater than personal gain. As the sun set each day, Elias would often stand at the edge of town, looking down the dusty streets at the small signs of progress. Children's laughter could sometimes be heard in the distance, and the smell of fresh bread or stew would drift from the inn. Dustwood was far from perfect, but it was alive, and it was his part to help it continue on that path. And slowly, almost without realizing it, Elias Turner began to feel a sense of belonging he had not known in years. The town needed him, and he needed it, not just for survival, but for the purpose, connection, and meaning that had been missing from his life. The days passed in a rhythm of work, learning, and quiet companionship. Dustwood, once forgotten, had begun to remember itself, and in the center of that revival stood a man who had arrived as a stranger, but had quickly become essential to the life and spirit of the town. The calm in Dustwood had begun to feel almost like a fragile treasure. Elias Turner had become part of the town, and for the first time in years he felt he belonged somewhere. But the peace that had settled over the dusty streets was not meant to last. Rumors began to spread through the town, rumors of a gang of outlaws heading their way. These were men who had no mercy, who had terrorized nearby settlements, stealing livestock and destroying property, leaving fear in their wake. Martha was the first to bring the news to Elias. She found him outside checking the fences and making sure the livestock were secure. "Elias," she said, her voice quiet but urgent, "I just heard from a traveler passing through. A gang is coming this way. They've hit other towns, and Dustwood might be next." Elias's expression hardened, though his voice remained calm. "We'll handle it," he said. "But we have to be prepared. I need to know that everyone here can protect themselves and the town if they have to." The news spread quickly, and the women of Dustwood grew anxious. They had come to rely on Elias, but fear still had a hold over them. Lila came running from the inn, her face pale. "Are we going to be safe?" she asked, clutching a broom as if it were a weapon. Elias knelt to meet her eyes. "We will be safe if we stay calm, work together, and follow the plan. Panicking won't help anyone. Dustwood has survived this long because of your strength and determination. Now, we'll add some protection to that." Over the next few days, Elias worked tirelessly, preparing the town for the possible attack. He reinforced doors and windows, secured the barns and storage areas, and organized the women to watch the streets at different times of the day. He taught them how to move quietly, how to signal each other in case of danger, and how to stay calm under pressure. Each woman learned quickly, driven by the knowledge that their safety and the safety of the town depended on them. But as the preparations continued, Elias faced an inner conflict he had not expected. He had wandered for years, never staying long enough to become attached. Now, with the danger approaching, he felt a fear he had not known before, not for himself, but for the people who had begun to depend on him. The thought of leaving Dustwood, as he had left other towns, now seemed impossible. He could not abandon them. Late one afternoon, as the sun dipped behind the hills and the shadows stretched long across the streets, Elias walked with Martha to inspect the perimeter of the town. The air was tense, filled with the quiet whispers of worry from the women at work. "Do you think we can really hold them off?" Martha asked softly, her eyes scanning the horizon. Elias placed a hand on her shoulder. "We have to believe we can," he said. "Dustwood has faced hardship before. We've survived storms, droughts, and loneliness. If we work together, we can face anything. You've all grown stronger than you know." Martha nodded, drawing courage from his words. She had come to trust Elias completely, not just for his strength, but for the calm certainty he brought. She realized that his presence had changed Dustwood, not just by protecting it, but by giving them all hope that the town could survive and even thrive. That night, Elias could not sleep. He lay awake on the small bed at the inn, listening to the wind rustle through the streets. He thought about the outlaws, about the danger approaching, and about the women who had come to rely on him. He knew he could fight them off, but the risk was high. And for the first time in his life, he realized that staying meant more than protecting a town. It meant committing to a community, to people who had begun to matter deeply to him. The following morning brought a challenge that tested their preparation. A small group of strangers rode into the outskirts of town. Not the full gang, but scouts sent ahead. The women noticed them immediately, and panic threatened to take hold. But Elias stepped forward, taking control of the situation. "Stay calm," he instructed. "Watch and learn. We don't know if they are here to scout or to cause trouble, but either way, we're ready." He mounted his horse and rode toward the strangers, his posture calm but commanding. As he approached, he called out, his voice steady, "This is Dustwood. Turn back now and you'll leave peacefully. Try anything foolish and you'll regret it." The men hesitated, sizing him up. They were confident, dangerous, and used to townspeople being afraid. But Elias did not show fear. He rode with authority, his presence alone sending a message that Dustwood would not be easy to conquer. After a tense moment, the men retreated, But Elias knew they would return with reinforcements. When he returned, the women gathered around him, relief and admiration in their eyes. "You did it," Lila said, her voice trembling slightly. "You scared them off." Elias shook his head. "They've only gone for now," he said. "We need to stay prepared. They'll likely come back with more. That's why we practice. That's why we have plans. Dustwood has to be ready." The next days were filled with training, preparation, and quiet moments of reflection. The women practiced what Elias had taught them, reinforcing their skills and their confidence. He spent time with each of them, guiding them and encouraging them, but also learning about their hopes, their fears, and their determination to protect the town they loved. Elias also struggled with his own emotions. He had wandered for years, always alone, avoiding attachment. But now he realized that leaving Dustwood would not only endanger the town, but also break something within himself. The thought of deserting these people after all they had shared and accomplished together was unbearable. And for the first time, he understood that staying was not just a choice of duty. It was a choice of the heart. One evening, as the sun set in brilliant shades of orange and red, Elias walked the streets of Dustwood, thinking about the coming days. The town had grown stronger, but danger still loomed. He knew the outlaws would return and the fight would test everyone's courage and skill. But he also knew that Dustwood was no longer a town of fear. It was a town of resilience, and he had helped ignite that spark. As he passed the inn, he noticed the women gathered outside, quietly talking, sharing stories, and laughing softly. The sight warmed him, filling him with a sense of purpose he had never felt before. Dustwood was no longer just a place on his journey. It was a home, fragile but alive, and he was part of it. Elias realized that the coming challenge would not just test their strength and preparation, it would test their unity, their trust, and their courage. And he was ready to face it with them. The town had depended on him, and now he depended on it, not just for survival, but for the sense of belonging he had found here. In that moment, standing in the quiet streets of Dustwood as the wind rustled through the dry grass, Elias Turner understood something profound. The town's survival depended not just on strength or skill, but on connection, loyalty, and courage, and he would do whatever it took to ensure that Dustwood endured. The outlaws would come, he knew, but Dustwood would not be the same town they remembered. It would be defended, protected, and alive, not just by Elias Turner, but by the women who had learned to stand together, guided by his strength and wisdom. And as the night settled over Dustwood, the stars shining brightly above the quiet town, Elias felt something he had not felt in years, a sense of belonging, a sense of purpose, and a deep commitment to the people who had welcomed him and begun to trust him completely. He was no longer just a wanderer passing through. He was part of something bigger, something worth defending with every ounce of his strength. The morning air in Dustwood carried a tense energy, heavier than any wind or storm the town had faced before. Word had come that the gang of outlaws, bigger and more dangerous than the scouts Elias had faced days ago, was heading directly toward the town. Dustwood, once forgotten and quiet, now braced itself for a test that would decide its future. The women moved with purpose, carrying tools, stacking supplies, and quietly taking positions they had practiced for weeks under Elias's guidance. The town had learned to prepare, but this was the moment when preparation would meet reality. Elias walked the streets, checking each house and structure with sharp eyes. He inspected the barricades, the reinforced doors, and the hidden escape paths he had taught the women to use in case of emergency. Every detail mattered. Every corner could be a point of defense or vulnerability. He had planned for this, but he knew that plans alone would not guarantee safety. Courage, unity, and quick thinking would be tested in ways they had only imagined. The women gathered in the town square, their faces a mixture of determination and fear. Lila stood tall, gripping the broom she had learned to use defensively, her eyes fixed on Elias. Martha, calm but alert, carried a small supply of tools, ready to help wherever needed. The others followed, some holding ropes, some with fire poker-like tools, all prepared to do whatever it took to protect Dustwood. Elias addressed them with steady authority. Today we face a challenge, not just from outsiders, but from fear itself. You have prepared, you have learned, and you have strengthened this town. You know what to do. Stay calm, trust each other, and do not panic. I will be with you every step of the way. The words carried reassurance. Dustwood, a town that had once struggled simply to survive, now stood ready to defend itself. The outlaws would not find easy prey here. By midday, the distant rumble of horses announced the arrival of the gang. Dustwood's dusty streets seemed smaller, but the town itself felt larger than it had in decades. Elias positioned the women strategically, giving them clear instructions and safe positions to strike if necessary. The outlaws, expecting an easy attack, were met with a town prepared to fight back. The first clash came quickly. The gang rode into the main street, confident, shouting threats and trying to intimidate the women into submission. But Dustwood was no longer helpless. Lila, Martha, and the others stood firm, signaling and working together exactly as Elias had taught them. Barrels were rolled into position to block movement. Ropes and makeshift tools were ready, and the outlaws found themselves facing a resistance they had not anticipated. Elias moved through the chaos like a calm storm. He guided the women, directing their actions, intercepting threats, and diffusing dangerous situations before they could escalate. His presence was a constant reassurance, his skill and bravery inspiring confidence and courage. The women, some of whom had never handled weapons or faced real danger before, found strength in his guidance. They realized they were capable of much more than they had ever imagined. The battle, while intense, was not without strategy. Elias had anticipated their movements and set traps and barriers that slowed the outlaws and protected the townspeople. The gang, expecting an easy conquest, grew frustrated and cautious. Every move they made was countered by Dustwood's clever defenses and the coordinated effort of its residents. Hours passed with tension high, but gradually the outlaws began to falter. The town's unity and preparation, guided by Elias, proved stronger than their aggression. One by one, the outlaws were forced to retreat, their confidence shattered, their plan to terrorize Dustwood failing completely. By late afternoon, the streets were quiet once more, the echoes of the battle fading into the dusty wind. The women of Dustwood gathered in the square, exhausted but triumphant. Elias walked among them, checking for injuries, ensuring everyone was safe, and offering words of encouragement. Lila, smiling despite her fatigue, looked at him with admiration. "We did it," she said, disbelief in her voice. "We really did it." Elias nodded, a small smile breaking his serious demeanor. "Yes," he said, "you all did it. I only guided you. The courage and strength came from each of you. Dustwood survived because of you." Martha stepped forward, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You didn't just guide us," she said. "You believed in us when we couldn't believe in ourselves. You stayed when you could have left, and that made all the difference." Elias felt a warmth he had never known in years of wandering. He had feared attachment, feared being needed, feared the responsibilities that came with staying. But now, standing among the women who had learned to trust, respect, and rely on him, he realized that staying was not a burden. It was a choice of the heart. Dustwood had given him a place, a purpose, and a connection he had never found anywhere else. The town began to rebuild immediately after the battle. Damaged fences were repaired, broken windows reinforced, and supplies reorganized. The women worked with renewed confidence, knowing they had faced real danger and survived. Children and elderly residents, who had stayed inside during the conflict, came out to see that their town was still standing, and their hope returned stronger than ever. Elias continued to guide and assist, but he also stepped back at times, letting the women take the lead. They had learned to defend themselves, to organize, and to work together. Dustwood was no longer just surviving. It was thriving, stronger and more united than it had been in decades. Evenings became moments of reflection and celebration. Around small fires, the townspeople shared stories, laughed softly, and appreciated the safety and strength they had reclaimed. Elias joined them, not as a stranger or a temporary protector, but as part of the community he had helped sustain. As the days passed, Dustwood's streets seemed brighter, not just because of repaired buildings or clean fences, but because of the renewed spirit of its people. The women moved with confidence, no longer fearful, and Elias walked among them with a quiet satisfaction. The town had survived not because of a single man, but because of the unity and courage that he had nurtured. Elias's own heart had changed. He had come to Dustwood expecting nothing more than a temporary place to rest and work. Instead, he found connection, purpose, and belonging. He realized that strength alone was not enough. He needed the town as much as the town needed him. They had become his home, and he was determined to stay, not out of duty alone, but because he truly cared for the people who had welcomed him and trusted him with their lives. Martha and Lila often walked with him along the streets at sunset, sharing quiet conversations about the town, their hopes for the future, and the memories of those who had left Dustwood. The bond between them deepened, not just in friendship, but in mutual respect and trust. Elias understood that protecting the town was only part of his role. Guiding and supporting its people, sharing in their joys and struggles, was equally important. One evening, as the stars twinkled over Dustwood and the wind carried the faint smell of wood smoke from the inn, Elias stood on a small rise overlooking the town. The streets were quiet, the buildings sturdy, and the town alive. Children's laughter echoed from a small yard, and women tended to gardens and livestock with ease and confidence. Dustwood had transformed from a forgotten town to a place of life, hope, and resilience. Elias felt a sense of pride, not in himself, but in what the town had become. He had played a part, yes, but the true strength came from the people who had learned to work together, to trust one another, and to rise above fear. He had arrived as a stranger, but he would stay as a protector, a friend, and a part of the town's future. And in the quiet moments, when the sun dipped low and the sky turned shades of orange and purple, Elias Turner realized something he had never allowed himself to feel before. Dustwood was not just a place to survive, it was a place to live, to belong, and to find meaning. For the first time in years, he felt whole. The town, once forgotten, would never be the same again. Its people were stronger, braver, and united. And Elias, the man who had wandered for so long, had found not just a home, but a purpose that would last for the rest of his days. Dustwood had survived because of courage, unity, and trust. And Elias had survived because he had finally found a place where he mattered, and where he was needed, not as a wanderer, but as part of a community that would remember him forever. As night fell and the town settled into quiet peace, Elias stood once more at the edge of Dustwood. He looked at the streets, the buildings, and the people he had come to care for. The town had faced danger and survived, and he had helped them do it. But more importantly, he had found a reason to stay, a reason to care, and a reason to belong. Dustwood was alive again, and so was he, in a way that wandering and solitude had never allowed. And, as the stars shone over the small town, Dustwood was no longer forgotten, not by the world, and certainly not by the man who had become its heart.